racing cars, not one particular racing car, any racing cars, because I feel they're built to do a job. And you look at a dragster, it's a fabulous thing. You look at a Formula One car, although I don't even look at them, but that's not really them. But everything is built to do the job. Come to bits easy, easy to repair. You know, you see a real racing car, it's definitely got a magic attached to it. Well, I think this is one of the ultimate racing cars of all time. It's a special. It was built by a bloke called Skirrow, who was a speedway rider, and he had a big shooting accident and he lost his hand. So he couldn't race scooters anymore, speedway bikes anymore. So he built a Skirrow, and it turned into be one of the most successful dirt track cars of all time. And he made a lot of them. There's all sorts of arguments about whether he made 50 or he made 100, I don't know. But he did make a lot of cars. This particular car was owned by a man called Dave Hughes. And what happened with Dave Hughes was, he was obviously a great enthusiast, and after the war, he bought up as many Skirrows as he could find, and he hoped to revive midget car racing, which is very difficult because there was a lot of jealousy between the midget car people and the speedway people. Speedway people said, oh, they're cutting up our track and we can't race and everything. And they did everything possible to make hard times for racing Skirrows. Anyway, Dave Hughes was a baker, and he was obviously quite successful. So he built his own track called Brayfield. It's still now. It's still there in Leicester, and they still race on it today. So old Dave Hughes was obviously a bit of a character. Well, anyway, obviously over the course of time, when it got into the 50s and 60s, these cars was built in 1936, so they were wearing out. And all the good bits was obviously getting put on Dave Hughes' car. So out of all the cars, and there were quite a few, the best survivor was this one, because it raced up, probably one of the last to ever race, and it had all the good bits on it, because Dave Hughes had a load of cars to take bits off of. Anyway, as far as I know, they all finished up in a breakage yard somewhere, and they all got broken up and what have you. But this car survived. Anyway, about, I don't know, probably, I say 15 years ago, but, you know, being old, it was probably 20 years ago. This car came up to South Bottoms, and I decided that, as I'd already got quite an interest in midget racing cars, and I understood all about them, that I ought to buy it. But the problem was I was going on holiday. So I had a young kid work for me, and he really was a young kid. I don't know how old he was, but he was the sort of boy that when he was 20, he'd go in the bar to buy a drink, and they'd say they wanted some identification of his age, because he really did look young for his age. His name was Philip. He's got his own double glazing business now, but anyway, he was a kid then. So as I was going on holiday, I said, now look, Philip, you're going to have to go to the auction and you're going to have to bid on this thing, and you must make sure you buy it. So prior to this, we went down to the auction and I showed him the car. I introduced him to the people at Bottoms and said, look, you know, he's going to bid for me. As it happened, it was probably quite a good thing, because nobody knew who Philip was. It was just a young kid bidding for this Skirrow. And he was bidding against a lot of Morgan people who just wanted to rob the engine, which I considered was a terrible tragedy, considering it lasted all these years, because the engine's a very special Jap engine. Anyway, so that's the story of how I bought the car. Young Philip bid on it, he bought it, and that was it. Bottoms waited for their money till I got back off holiday, which I thought was quite good of them, and that was it, and that was the start of this car. It was all in very good condition, but we took it completely to pieces. Every nut and bolt, cleaned it all up, didn't do any restoration, and luckily I did, because the front main shaft on the engine had turned very slightly, and where it sends oil down the main shaft into the crankshaft and up to the big end, where it had turned, it had sealed the hole off. So the old engine wouldn't have lasted very long if I hadn't took it to bits. But anyway, I took it to bits, it was all in good condition, cleaned it all up, put it back together again. So I thought I'd make this video and go round it for you to show you what I mean about the ultimate special, you know, because old Skirrow was obviously no dope, and he'd worked out how to do this car, and it's made from a load of bits. A lot of it is BSA three-wheeler, because BSA were front-wheel drive. So the corners of this car are all BSA three-wheeler. The chassis was made by Blakers, because he made so many of them, he obviously got pretty professional. The engine is a JTOR-S, which means it's a sprint engine, but it's also got a line and another S. Lots of people will tell you that is the year of the engine, but it's not on this particular case. The S means special order, and obviously old Skirrow, having made a lot of these cars, probably more than 50, was, he was a good customer for Japs. Not only were they selling him new engines, but they were obviously selling bits to all the blokes that were racing them. So for him to have a special order is not an impossibility. So that's the story with the Skirrow. So the last time I drove it was at Chateau Impney, and it went very well in practice, and there was lots of Morgan people there, and I said, "Oh, give us a push," and they give me a push and it'd start. Anyway, it went out on a plug, and I was convinced it was the plug or something wrong with the cylinder, because I had the magnetos rebuilt literally weeks before, so I didn't even bother to look at the mags. But as it happens, one of the end plates on the mag came loose and fell off, and that was why it wasn't firing on the cylinder. But the funny part is that when I first said, "Give us a push, boys," they all gave me a push, it was no trouble. But at the time we had all this aggravation, I'd sort of do something, look round, and all the people that had been pushing me had all hidden, or hiding behind their cars, or running off, because it was such a beast to push. Because being four-wheel drive and no diffs, the minute you turn the steering wheel, it stops dead. So that caused me a load of aggravation, and to be honest, running at Chateau Impney was a nightmare really, because they say, "Oh, you switch your engine off." Well, the minute you switch the engine off, you have a push to start it. So I decided that if I ever did anything with this again, we'd have to somehow or other work out how to fit a self-starter, but we haven't found that out yet. But it hasn't run since Chateau Impney, and it was starting to look a bit sad, and I thought, well, we'll get it all cleaned up. We'll have a look at the mag, because that was the problem. John's made some very nice screws, exact replicas of the ones that fell out, and so that's it now. But while we got the body off, I thought it'd be quite interesting for Tanya to go around with the camera and show you how it's managed to get four-wheel drive in the most simplest method in the history of the world, I should think. And of course it really worked. In fact, they took one of these cars to America, and it was so successful that they banned four-wheel drive in America, because obviously all the offers and everything would have had to got converted, which wouldn't have been very nice. So I understand what they meant, and it's quite obvious that it would have caused us a lot of aggro, so that didn't happen. But anyway, I think this is the only running Skirrow in the world. There are quite a few with no engines, because obviously the engines got pinched out of them to put in Morgans and one thing and another. In fact, the start of it was Spike Riando raced one of these cars, and he was a bit of a mover, Spike Riando. And after the war, he still had his Skirrow, and he bought a 500 Cooper, and he put the Skirrow engine, which was the racing Jap, in the back. And of course then it was an 1100 racing car or 1000 racing car, and they were very successful at hill climbs and all sorts of things. In fact, I think Sterling actually drove one in a Formula 1 race, but I might have got that wrong. But it didn't last, and of course these engines were a bit fragile, I think. But nowadays, because all the Morgan blokes have made all the mods you can think of, and they've been racing them for so long now, that they've really got it cracked, and they seem to be dead reliable. And I believe they're giving 100 horsepower, if not a little bit more, whereas this engine was guaranteed to give 80 brake horsepower, and it runs on pure methanol, and it's got a total loss oiling system. So that's really all I can say about them. I've got loads of photographs and loads of history, and all sorts of lovely people that have lent me stuff and given me stuff, and I could make another video about that. So if you're really interested in know about Walter Maccareath, I think it was Les Pashley, there was loads and loads of racing drivers, and in my opinion, they were real racing drivers. You didn't have to be a multi-millionaire to go and buy the best Bugatti and win the British Grand Prix. You could have been a lorry driver and got your foot in one of these. So when they were racing, and it was bloody dangerous, I can imagine. But I'd love to have seen it. In fact, one of the people that is in touch with me regularly, his name I can't remember just like that, but I will remember his name when I do the next bit. His dad kept all his records and photographs. He's got some fabulous stuff of which he's given me copies. And he reckons his dad had in his notes, they geared them to bounce their valves at 80 miles an hour. Well, I can't imagine doing 80 miles an hour in this, but anyway, that's another story. Anyway, that's it now. So we'll now look round the car and I'll go over all the little points of it that's really good. From the racing Jap engine to the four-wheel drive to the BSA bits. This is quite a late Jap engine. It obviously Jap stands for I think it's John Arthur Prestwick. It's got nothing to do with Japan. But anyway, so this is quite a late engine, so it's got totally enclosed valve gear, which is very nice, obviously, when you're driving around on cinders. It's also got a pipe which goes up and oils it all, and then it's got another couple of little pipes that oil the valve guides, which again is good when you're running on methanol. It's got twin magnetos, and they're proper competition magnetos. It's got a dual Pilgrim pump. So what you do, you can set that up on this sort of clicker system where you send a load down to the big end and perhaps a little bit less up to the rocker gear. So that's quite sophisticated, because the early engines, they didn't have any mechanism of oiling the top, and they were called JTOR engines and KTOR engines. So it's got the twin mags, it's got the twin Pilgrim, and it's got two lovely track Amel carburetors which run on methanol, and they're absolutely beautiful, because when you get it running it ticks over like it's got fuel injection. You blip the throttle and it goes off like a rocket. So it's a lovely engine really. Anyway, this is the sheet for telling which engine it is, and it says here JTORS, which is what this engine's got stamped on it. JTORS, it says it's a 998cc Sprint V-twin. It's called an 880, and the measurements are 80mm bore and 99mm stroke. So that is this engine, but it's also got a line and another S, and that S, I'm told, stands for special order, which I've already mentioned earlier. So old matey could obviously buy them from Japs as a special order. So the front suspension, this upright is from a BSA three-wheeler, which obviously in 1936 there was probably loads of them breakers yards. I don't know whether he might have bought them direct from BSA, but that's what that is. And this steering column is also BSA three-wheeler, and the steering column goes off at an angle, and the steering wheel's at an angle, which is, you know, you look at it and you think, oh, I don't like the look of that, but I can assure you that when you drive the car, you don't notice it at all. It's at an angle like that in the car, because obviously it has to go across like that, but it feels perfect. And as I say, the end cap came off of one of these mags, and also sorted that, so hopefully when we put it back together, we'll get it running. So that's the BSA bit. Now, how do you make a four-wheel drive racing car in the simplest way possible and the least amount of money? We'll go through how he did it, which is very clever in my opinion. Right, so now on the engine it's got a double sprocket with a chain going forward and a chain going back. Well, you couldn't get more simpler than that. And that there is a speedway motorbike clutch and countershaft. So it comes off the engine, goes to the speedway countershaft and clutch, and then the chain then goes on to a gear on the front suspension which drives the front axle. So that is all clever. So obviously when you push the clutch out, you don't push one clutch out, you push two clutches out. So this cable is a very important cable, because obviously when you're sitting in the car you push the thing down, and that is how the car, you can start the car and it will freewheel. So that's that. Right, so now it's now got a chain going backwards, so another speedway countershaft clutch, which is connected to the other one by cable. So when you push the clutch out, it pushes both of them out. And then there's another chain goes to the back axle around the same kind of sprocket to drive the drive shaft. And then there's a thing in here which has got a spring-loaded sort of mechanism which adjusts this rear chain, which is that. So you can adjust that chain with that, so you move the gearbox back, and then this chain is adjusted with this thing here, which is spring-loaded to take the strain. And it's four-wheel drive. I mean, you couldn't get more simple than that. Clever old Skirrow. And of course, when this all started up, everybody was building specials. You know, they were building Austin 7s, and they were using salts and bits, which used to annoy my dad. And but when the Skirrow came along, well, that was it. If you didn't have a Skirrow, I don't think you stood a lot of chance. And it was a bit like that with 500cc racing, because that all started off with specials. But when Coopers made their car, you had to have a Cooper. So Sterling Moss had the latest Cooper, and I mean, there were other cars, you know. I can't think of their names just off the head like that, but you know, obviously the Cooper was the important car, and in midget car racing, the Skirrow was the important car. There's all sorts of arguments about how many he made. He may have made 50, he may have made more, we don't really know. But there's all sorts of records out there, and over the years I've collected a lot of information, and I'm still collecting information. I'm still getting old boys say to me, and I've always hoped that one day we'd have a little bit of a meeting here and invite all the necessary people so we could all see one going. So that's one of the reasons I'm getting it out and cleaning it up and getting it going, because it was definitely looking a bit neglected after Chateau Ypres. So the next video, this will be that video. The next video will be putting it together and starting it up. But I would like to just say, I've got a young lady from Ukraine helping me here who's got a low-cut t-shirt on, and it's very hard for me to concentrate. But other than that, I think it'll be all right. I hit a bump over there and I hit my head on the steering wheel. Oh. Yeah, I hit a bump just there somewhere.
I saw you go, I thought you were going to come out.
I think that's it. Right. Well, that's it. We had a bit of a drive in it, but when I hit my head on the steering wheel, very gently as it happens, not hurt at all, but I thought, you know, steady on, old boy. Don't want to get carried away here. The trouble is, it has to be smooth, because this thing has got no suspension. And if it's smooth, but the minute you give it the full throttle, I mean, it just goes off like a loony. So what it was like racing these around the track with loads of other people, I can't imagine. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to undo the pipes, because it ran out of fuel, but I'm making absolutely sure we drain the methanol, because methanol does wicked things to aluminium and things like that. So anyway, that's the next job.